Hey guys, it's Bailey. Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be an exciting dupe or dud where I compare the BECCA, the One Perfecting Brush, this retails for $49, to e.l.f.'s Ultimate Kabuki brush, which retails for $10. So if you want to see whether you can pass on the splurge and go straight for the dupe, please continue watching. So for starters, the BECCA, the One Ultimate Yada Yada brush, like I said, retails for $49. Mine has a gold, I suppose this is still technically called a ferrule. This is a limited edition brush though. I'm not sure how limited it is, but the other regular standard edition brush has a brown ferrule. To my knowledge, that's the extent of their differences. They both retail for $49 and they both serve the same 10 purposes. Mine was a Christmas present, however, which is why it's the limited edition one. And no sooner could I get this out of the box and into my daily routine to give it a good test than e.l.f. actually sent the Ultimate Kabuki over for me to try. So naturally, these two are very, very similar looking, so I wanted to put them to the test, give you my thoughts. By comparison here, you can see e.l.f.'s is splayed slightly farther. The bases themselves are nearly the same width, but e.l.f.'s is definitely fluffier, and you can tell more so here. This is not quite double the width, but it's significantly thicker. Now I want to run through what each of these brushes is supposed to do and then compare them side by side. So I actually need to have this in front of me because this is supposed to do a heck of a lot. 10 in 1 actually is what they say. So this can be used effectively as a foundation brush, powder brush, contour brush, bronzer brush, stipple brush, blush brush, fan brush, concealer brush, kabuki, or sponge. And although e.l.f.'s website doesn't go into as many details as that, the general shape suggests it can do exactly the same, and they do suggest it's a multitasker. The bristles on the BECCA brush are natural, and although they say they're non-porous, I did notice more product getting absorbed into the BECCA brush than did in the e.l.f. Ultimate Kabuki. These are Taklon fibers, so they are definitely synthetic, a little bit easier to clean. That being said though, I just recently watched this BECCA, and you can see there is only a little bit of product discoloration here that I absolutely couldn't get out. The rest, though, was relatively easy to remove, which can't be said for a lot of natural fiber brushes that I have, so it was relatively easy to clean. They also mentioned conditioning the ends of these bristles here to keep them from fraying and getting all splayed out, because that really kind of kills the purpose of this brush when you're going in for a nice tight contour there. So that's what I did, but something that you're going to want to be conscious of is that conditioner you're going to put on your bristles is at some point going to end up on your face. And as we all know, if any of us have had back breakouts, we can attribute it to our hair products. It's something you're going to want to be wary of, and something you don't have to worry about with the e.l.f. Ultimate Kabuki brush. That being said though, as long as we're comparing the fibers, I found that it was easier to blend product in using the BECCA brush, whether it was a liquid, cream, powder, any of that. I just found the BECCA really buffed and blended everything in a little bit easier than the e.l.f. Kabuki brush. Another thing that contributed to the ease of blending is the size, and this is probably the main sticking point for me and probably what helped me make up my mind most easily in this entire comparison. Right here you can see a good size comparison. I noted earlier that the e.l.f. was larger, although it's not quite 2 times as large. It is quite a bit thicker, especially when it comes to applying product, which is when this is actually important. So when it comes to applying foundation, both of these function really, really well. I have a demo going, if not already starting now, of me using these to apply to either side of my face. For foundation, I used a liquid here. Both perform pretty equally in terms of where exactly you can apply that and how effectively you can apply it. Like I said, the biggest difference for me was how effective each was at buffing. The BECCA absorbed a little bit more product, so you're gonna encounter a little bit more product loss with the BECCA, but the finish was a little more flawless, a little more easy to get flawless with the BECCA over the e.l.f. I also use these for under eye work, not only to apply brightener and concealer, but also setting powder. In this department, the BECCA won because they recommend using this narrow tip here for getting in that under eye area, but that additional width made all the difference with the e.l.f. and the fact that these bristles are bound a little less tightly. It made it a little harder to get them nice and narrow and precise to get up in the under eye area, where the BECCA, I didn't have to manipulate it at all. It fit nicely in there, and the bristles were stiff and compact enough to really buff that product and stipple that product in nicely. Next up in contour, something these brushes look like they are built to do, and the BECCA performs beautifully. The width here, you can see it's perfect for getting right in that divot in your cheek where the contour is supposed to go. You can wiggle it really nicely in there, and then I recommend going downward to create sort of a natural hollow to the cheek. The e.l.f. on on the other hand, was a little bit harder to do that with, and I've said this before, I think I have an abnormally large head, so if it was going to work on anyone's face, it was going to be mine. For those that have just a smaller surface area on their head in general, is going to find that this doesn't fit as comfortably into the hollows of your cheeks as the BECCA does, and what that means for a contour job is that it's not going to be as precise. So what I found I had to do was use one of these edges here, dip that in the contour, and go about it that way. It's a little bit harder, it takes a little bit more adjusting, but I noticed the biggest difference in applying contour or bronzer when it came to getting up in the temples. BECCA's is precise enough that you can just do clean little sweeps here and you don't have to worry about messing up your brows if you prefer to do those first. You don't have to worry about getting it in your hairline, a personal pet peeve of mine. Elf's, on the other hand, is too wide, like I said, for me, again, to get in between those spaces, and so I found myself having just to use that edge there. Even then, it was a little bit more messy than the BECCA. Overall, when it came to that precision work, Elf's was a little more cumbersome to use. I really found that I had to manipulate the bristles, and not always easily, to do what I needed it to do. Then I used both of these for a powder blush. Once again, they recommend using this narrow end here to get a more precise application as opposed to trying to work, you know, every which way like this with a powder blush. Just dab a little bit here on the outer edge and stipple that or swipe it right on the apples of your cheeks. Both of these, I have to say, won equally in that department, and the same can be said for highlight, which, like similar to bronzing, you flip it horizontally and dab on the tops of your cheekbones, but less precision is required there because it's highlight. You don't have to worry about colors getting muddied up or overdoing it as you might with bronzer. You can be a little bit more lazy when it comes to highlighter in my book. The only thing I do want to mention though with highlighter is the BECCA is more equipped to go run down the bridge of your nose, and the stiffer bristles help get the Cupid's bow, whereas the Kabuki brush I tried to get my Cupid's bow and ended up with just like shimmery lips all over. It was kind of a mess. And then the last thing I want to mention is, despite the fact that these bristles are easier to clean, they don't absorb as much product, this brush shed like crazy, and it's such an unusual problem for me to have with e.l.f. brushes because I swear I have tons and tons of them, and I don't think I've encountered a shed bristle with one. This one just shed like crazy. I think you'll be able to see in the demo, these long fibers just kept shedding on the side of my face that I was using this on. It was really difficult to get any work done. I found I kept having to pick it out of all the cream product, and I still kept finding them on my face throughout the day. So that was really unfortunate to find with this brush. All in all, I have to say, despite the price discrepancy, the BECCA really wins in my book, and it all comes down to function. Yes, this might be way cheaper, but it was more cumbersome to get the job done. I don't really want to have to work with a brush to get it to do what it's supposed to do, and it just came so easily with the BECCA. So when talking about just how well it gets the job done, the BECCA brush wins, and given that it does serve all those purposes of foundation, blush, contour, you don't have to wash it in between uses. I use this from foundation to, you know, highlight without washing it in between. It literally serves the purpose of all those brushes. I would say $49 is not a bad price, so when you're trying to justify that in your mind, it's pretty easy to me in that respect. But in the event that you don't need a brush that does 10 in 1, because let's be honest, we've been functioning that way for our entire makeup lives at this point, there are some great recommendations that from e.l.f. that I wanted to give you in lieu of this Kabuki brush. Now this is actually not from e.l.f., this is from MUA, but the one that I had from e.l.f. that I would recommend, mine broke a while ago, and because I have similar brushes, I never bothered to repurchase, but it is one that I would recommend. It is the Studio Powder Brush, and it's a flat top Kabuki like this, and basically it's great, despite saying it's for powder, great at buffing in foundation. Next is the e.l.f. Complexion Brush, and this is like a standard flat but fluffy brush that you can dip in powder and use to set in your under eye area, even apply bronzer kind of liberally all over the face if you want to. If you want a more precise bronzer, I would recommend one of two brushes, either the small tapered brush, which is probably my favorite of the two. This, you can see it has kind of a narrow dome tip and it fits perfectly in the hollows of your cheeks. It's especially great for building up a nice deep contour out here and then blending out as you get towards the center of your face. On the other hand, there is also the angled blush brush. Once again, it fits nicely in there, is a little bit larger as you can see than the small tapered brush, but it essentially accomplishes the same purpose. It really gets in there, and this I find is also great to use for blush or even highlight as well. And this is a longtime favorite. It's the e.l.f. blush brush. It's perfectly shaped to just dab product on the apples of your cheeks. It's fluffy enough to pick up a nice amount of product, but the bristles are still soft enough such that it gets diffused really, really nicely without building up the pigmentation too intensely at first. So those are my suggestions. If you're not dead set on having one brush for everything, these are some great replacements for e.l.f.'s Ultimate Kabuki, and you're still not breaking the bank. However, if you have been tempted by BECCA's The One Perfecting Brush and you like the idea of a 10-in-1 sort of product, I really do recommend this over the Ultimate Kabuki just because it does provide a little more precision. It gets the job done unlike the e.l.f. Kabuki can. It provides that precision, it blends and buffs things out beautifully, more easily than the e.l.f. does. And when it comes to function, it just wins. So I really hope this review, or comparison I guess, was useful. I definitely think it's a dud when it comes to completely duplicating the BECCA brush, but it was worth a shot, and I really hope that my other recommendations helped you anyway. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!